The first thing my mother said when I pulled into Reed Ranch was not hello. It was not that she was glad I had come. It was, Savannah, please tell me you are not parking that thing where people can see it. She stood on the front steps in a cream linen dress, one hand pressed to her pearls, staring at Grandpa Amos's faded blue 1978 Ford pickup, like I had dragged a dead animal into the family reunion. I was 32 years old enough to have a mortgage, a career, and a full understanding of what people mean when they smile with only their mouths. I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and worked in agricultural asset management, which was a polished way of saying, I spent my days reading land contracts, bank notices, auction packets, and the kind of paperwork families ignore until a stranger owns their fence line. That morning I had driven almost 3 hours to attend the Reed family reunion, even though every mile of highway reminded me why I had stayed away. I had not come because I missed the potato salad or the forced photographs under the cottonwoods. I had come because Reed Ranch was being sold that afternoon and my family had no idea I knew the truth. The truck coughed once, after I turned off the engine, then settled into the same stubborn silence it had carried for decades. The paint was sunburned, the bench seat was cracked, and the radio only worked when the road got rough enough to shake it awake. To my mother, it was an embarrassment. To me, it was the last honest thing left in the Reed family. My father, Wade Reed, appeared behind her with his jaw already set. He had aged into the kind of man who mistook volume for authority and silence for guilt. Behind him, through the open front door, I could see cousins moving through the house, with glasses of iced tea, laughing under framed photographs of cattle drives, county fairs, and Grandpa Amos standing beside that very truck when it was new. Savannah, Dad said in the careful voice he used when other people might hear him, we talked about this. Today is important. We have business associates here, family from 3 states. This is not the time for one of your statements. He looked past me at the truck, then at my boots. You could have made an effort. I glanced down at myself. Dark jeans, clean shirt, denim jacket, hair pulled back because Oklahoma wind does not care about reunions. Nothing about me was dirty. Nothing about me was disrespectful. But in my family, disrespect did not mean cruelty or lies or gambling away land. It meant arriving without something expensive enough to photograph. Before I could answer, my brother Colton stepped out with a beer in one hand and sunglasses resting on top of his head, though he was in the shade. He wore a white button-down too tight across the shoulders, tucked into pressed jeans with a belt buckle, big enough to signal money even when there was none behind it. Colton had always understood costume better than character. Well, look at that, he said loud enough for 2 cousins near the porch to turn. Savvy brought the museum piece. He laughed and walked down the steps slowly like he owned the gravel under his boots. You know I can probably get somebody from town to tow it around back before the group photo. My hands stayed on the keys in my pocket. They were warm from the ignition, the old Ford key worn smooth, where Grandpa Amos's thumb used to press. There had been a time when Colton's voice could make my stomach fold in on itself. That morning, it only reminded me of a file folder sitting on the passenger seat beneath my jacket. Good to see you too, Colton, I said. He smiled wider because calm had always irritated him more than anger. Don't be like that. We're just saying this is a family reunion. People are dressed nice. Dad invited folks who matter. You show up in Grandpa's rust bucket, looking like you came to fix a fence. He leaned closer. Which, to be fair, was always more your lane. The cousins on the porch pretended not to listen. My mother looked pained, but not because her son had insulted me. She looked pained because I had given him an opportunity to do it where people could hear. That was the thing about Marlene Reed. She could forgive any cruelty as long as it happened quietly, but she treated visible hurt like bad manners. I looked over her shoulder at the house. The porch still sagged a little on the left side where Grandpa Amos used to say he would fix it next spring, then never did because he liked sitting there and pretending not to notice us sneaking cookies through the kitchen window. The blue wind chime he had made from old horseshoes still hung near the door, though someone had polished it until it looked decorative instead of real. When I was little, this ranch had felt bigger than the world. 1,200 acres of grassland, creek bottom, red dirt, cedar breaks, and fences that ran so long they disappeared into heat shimmer. Grandpa Amos taught me every corner of it from the passenger seat of that old truck. He taught me where the soil changed, where the north pasture flooded first, where the cattle would break through if a storm came too fast. He taught Colton too, or tried to, but Colton got bored after 10 minutes and asked when he could drive the four-wheeler. Grandpa never yelled at him. He just watched my brother race dust into the air, then handed me the map instead. Land tells the truth, he told me once, tapping the paper with his knuckle. People can dress up a lie, but land won't. That sentence had stayed with me longer than anything my parents ever said. I thought about it when I got my first job filing foreclosure packets for a rural bank outside Stillwater. I thought about it when I learned how fast a ranch could be lost by people who used words like legacy while signing loans they had no intention of understanding. I thought about it when I saw the first notice with Reed Ranch printed in the header. My father cleared his throat. "You're welcome to stay if you can behave," he said, "but the truck needs to be moved out of sight. And I don't want any comments today about family business. Your mother has worked very hard to make this reunion nice." "Family business," I repeated. Colton's face tightened for half a second. It was small, but I saw it. Men like my brother could charm a room, but they never learned how to control the flicker in their eyes when someone touched the right wire. He recovered quickly and lifted his beer toward me. "There she goes. Always suspicious. Always acting like she's the only one who cares about this place." "You don't want me talking about the ranch?" I asked. Dad stepped down one stair. "I want you to stop making everything sound like an accusation. This family has made decisions you don't understand. Grown-up decisions. You walked away years ago, Savannah. You do not get to come back and judge the people who stayed." That one landed where he meant it to. Not because it was true, but because he had repeated it for so long that half the family believed it. I walked away. I abandoned them. I chose pride over blood. Nobody mentioned the night Dad told me, if I could not respect Colton's role in the family, I could find somewhere else to sleep. Nobody mentioned Mom putting my suitcase on the porch before dawn. I could have said all of that. I could have reminded him that I was 21 when I left, with $200, 3 changes of clothes, and Grandpa's truck, because it was the only vehicle titled in my name. I could have said that staying silent while Colton borrowed against the ranch was not loyalty. It was cowardice, wearing a family crest. Instead, I looked at the gravel drive lined with rental SUVs and polished pickups that had never hauled feed, never crossed a pasture, never carried a crying girl away from the only home that had ever felt safe. I looked at the white tents set up near the barn, the catered buffet, the banner that read, "Reed Family Reunion," in navy letters. They had dressed up the wound beautifully. Mom came down the steps and lowered her voice. "Savannah, sweetheart, please don't make this harder. Your father's blood pressure has been awful and Colton is under a lot of pressure. We invited you because we wanted peace. But peace means everyone doing their part." There it was. The word peace. In my mother's mouth, peace had never meant honesty. It meant the hurt person swallowing enough pain to keep the comfortable people comfortable. It meant I was supposed to smile beside the brother who had mocked me, hug the parents who had erased me, and pretend the ranch was not scheduled to be auctioned off less than an hour from now. "What part do you want me to do?" I asked. She glanced at the truck again. "Move it behind the equipment shed. Freshen up in the guest bathroom. And when people ask what you're doing now, just keep it simple. No need to bring up banks or distressed properties or whatever it is you do. This is a happy day." A happy day. I almost laughed, but something in me was too tired to give them even that much sound. They were about to lose Grandpa Amos's entire ranch because Colton had wrapped bad debt in confident language, and my mother was worried that my job title might make lunch awkward. It was the most Reed thing I had ever heard. Colton stepped beside her, smiling again. "Come on, Savvy. Don't look so wounded. Some people are born to own land." He let his eyes travel from my boots to the truck and back. "Others are just born to drive around it in a broken-down truck." For a moment, the whole yard went quiet in that strange way families go quiet when someone says the cruel part out loud. A cousin near the porch looked down at her drink. My aunt turned her face toward the barn. My father did nothing. My mother pressed her lips together, not in shock but in warning, as if my reaction would be the real offense. I felt the old heat rise in my throat. The version of me who left at 21 would have cried. The version of me who spent 11 years reading contracts built on other people's mistakes only blinked once and breathed through it. I had learned that the most dangerous moment in a room is not when people insult you. It is when they assume you still need their permission to stand there. "All right," I said. Mom's shoulders softened with relief, because she thought that meant I was obeying. Dad gave one sharp nod, already dismissing me. Colton looked disappointed that I had not given him a scene. They all stepped back toward the house, toward the noise and the food and the false story they had prepared for everyone under the tent. I walked to the truck, opened the passenger door, and lifted my denim jacket off the file folder beneath it. Inside were copies of lien notices, auction terms, debt summaries, a cashier's confirmation, and one sealed page from the auction company, addressed to my representative in Tulsa. I did not need to show them yet. Truth like land does not get weaker because someone refuses to look at it. As I slid behind the wheel, Mom called from the porch. "Savannah, where are you going?" I started the engine. It turned over rough, then steady the way it always did if you trusted it long enough. Through the windshield, I saw my family framed by the house Grandpa Amos built, standing on land they had already lost in every way that mattered except legally. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. The auction started in 47 minutes. I backed the truck down the gravel drive without answering. In the rearview mirror, Colton shook his head and laughed like I was leaving defeated. My father put an arm around my mother as if they had protected the family from embarrassment. None of them saw the auction packet on the seat beside me. None of them knew the winning bidder had already requested a public announcement. And none of them knew the name inside that envelope was mine. People like to say families fall apart because of one big betrayal. That sounds clean like a fence snapping in a storm. But most families do not break that way. They rot post by post, year by year, while everyone keeps leaning on the same rails and pretending the wood still holds. By the time I left Reed Ranch at 21, the betrayal had been happening for so long that I did not recognize it as betrayal anymore. I thought it was just the way love sounded in our house. Colton was born first, and my parents treated that like a lifelong achievement. His baby pictures were framed in the hallway. His Little League trophies stayed on the mantle until he was 27. When he got a C in math, Dad said he was too practical for classrooms. When I got an A, Mom said I should not make my brother feel bad by talking about grades at dinner. That was the first rule I learned. Colton's pride was a family heirloom. Mine was a problem. Grandpa Amos never said it out loud, but he saw the difference. He was not a soft man. He had hands like split leather, and a voice that could stop a horse in its tracks, but he never confused loudness with strength. When I was 8, he found me crying behind the feed shed after Colton told me girls did not inherit ranches, they just married men who did. Grandpa handed me a fence staple and said, "Then you better learn how to build something no fool can take from you." After that, he started taking me with him in the blue Ford every Saturday. We checked water troughs, counted calves, cleared brush, and drove the fence line so slowly that I memorized every dip in the land. He let me ask questions most adults brushed off. Why did one pasture grow thicker grass? Why did he never sell the creek bottom? Why did he keep old maps in the glove box? He answered everything with patience, like my curiosity was not annoying but useful. Colton came with us sometimes, usually when Dad made him. He would slump against the passenger door, bored before the engine warmed up, asking when Grandpa was going to buy a newer truck or why we had to patch fences ourselves when hired hands could do it. Grandpa would listen, chew the inside of his cheek, then hand me the wire cutters. He never told Colton he was lazy, he just stopped offering him the tools. By the time we were teenagers, the shape of our family was obvious. Colton belonged in the front room with Dad shaking hands with feed suppliers, bankers, county officials, and men who used the word legacy when they meant leverage. I belonged outside. I knew how to mend a gate, drive a trailer, read a plat map, and tell by the smell of the air whether rain would actually reach us or pass north. My parents called those chores. Grandpa called them an education. Mom wanted me different. She wanted me in clean dresses at church, smiling beside her at fundraisers, learning how to make conversation with people who measured worth by last names and table manners. Whenever she saw me come in dusty from the pastures, she sighed as if I had failed an exam nobody had told me about. "Savannah," she would say, "you do not have to make yourself look so hard." I did not know how to explain that I was not trying to look hard. I was trying to be useful. When Grandpa Amos got sick, the whole ranch changed temperature. Dad became impatient, Mom became sentimental in public, and sharp in private. Colton started showing up more often, but not for the work. He came with business magazines, printed proposals, and a new vocabulary he had learned from men in pressed shirts. Diversification, expansion, modernization. He said Reed Ranch had potential if Grandpa would stop treating it like a shrine. Grandpa listened to him once at the kitchen table. Colton spread papers beside the salt shaker and talked about a new equipment distribution company he wanted to start. He said the Reed name could open doors. He said rural America was changing and families who did not evolve would get left behind. Dad looked proud enough to burst. Mom dabbed her eyes and said it was beautiful to see Colton caring about the future. Grandpa looked at the papers, then at me. "What do you think, Savvy?" he asked. The room went still. I was 19, standing by the sink with dishwater cooling around my hands. Colton laughed like Grandpa had made a joke. Dad's face hardened. Mom said, "Amos, don't put her on the spot," but Grandpa waited. I dried my hands and looked at the numbers. I did not understand all of it then, but I understood enough. The revenue projections were too clean. The debt assumptions were too soft. The ranch was listed as collateral in 2 possible funding models. "I think it risks too much land for a business that does not exist yet," I said. Colton stared at me. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," I said. "But if it fails, the ranch pays for it." Dad slammed his palm on the table so hard the spoons jumped. "Enough. Your brother is trying to build something for this family. You think fixing fences makes you qualified to question him?" Mom whispered my name like I had cursed in church. Grandpa did not defend me that night. He only folded the papers carefully and slid them back to Colton. 2 weeks later, he changed the lock on his file cabinet. He died the following winter just after a hard freeze silvered the whole ranch. The funeral was packed with people who suddenly had stories about him, people who called him a legend, though half of them had ignored him when he was alive. I remember standing near the casket, while Colton accepted condolences like a politician. Dad kept one hand on my brother's shoulder. Mom told everyone how proud Grandpa had been of his grandson. Nobody asked what Grandpa had said to me on his last clear morning. He had asked me to drive him to the north pasture. He was too weak to get out, so we sat in the truck with the heater rattling and watched cattle move like dark stones across the frost. After a long time, he put his hand on the dashboard and said, "This old thing will be yours when I'm gone." I tried to argue, but he shook his head. "Not because it's worth money, because you'll remember what it carried." The title transfer was simple. Nobody fought me over the truck because nobody wanted it. Dad said it was fitting. Colton joked that I finally had an inheritance on my level. Mom told me not to be sensitive. At 20 years old, I smiled because I had not yet learned that swallowing insult after insult does not make you gracious. It makes other people hungry. For a few months after Grandpa died, things were quiet. Then the conversations started behind closed doors. Dad and Colton met with bankers. Mom hosted dinners with men I did not know. I heard words through vents and thin walls. Bridge loan. Short-term pledge. Temporary restructuring. Family assets. I asked questions and got punished with sighs, lectures, and silence. They said I was paranoid. They said I had always resented Colton. They said Grandpa's death had made me unstable. One afternoon I went into the old office to look for a pasture map and found a copy of a loan packet tucked beneath a stack of seed catalogs. Reed Ranch was listed in language that made my stomach go cold. Not sold. Not gone. But tied down. The North Pasture Creek, rights, equipment, barn, and main house were referenced as collateral support for a financing structure linked to Colton Reed Agricultural Supply LLC. My brother had dressed his ambition in my grandfather's land. I carried the packet straight to the kitchen, where Dad was drinking coffee, and Mom was writing thank you notes from the funeral months earlier, because grief for her had to be properly documented. Colton was there too, scrolling through his phone. I laid the papers on the table. My voice shook, but not because I was unsure. "Why is the ranch attached to Colton's business loan?" Dad's eyes moved over the first page, then stopped. Colton stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "Where did you get that?" "That's what you care about." Mom's face went pale in the way people look when truth enters without permission. "Savannah, you had no right going through private documents." "They were in Grandpa's office," I said. "This is ranch business." "No," Dad said, rising. "This is family business. And you are not going to stand here and accuse your brother because you cannot handle that he has plans bigger than feeding cows." Colton stepped toward me, all charm gone. "You think you're the only one who loved this place? You drive around in that truck and act like Grandpa made you queen of the dirt." "I'm trying to turn the Reed name into something real." "It was already real," I said. "Before you started borrowing against it." That was the sentence that ended my place in the house. Dad pointed at me and told me I was done poisoning the family. Mom began crying, not softly but theatrically, saying she could not believe I would attack my brother when he was carrying so much responsibility. Colton said I was jealous, bitter, and small. The 3 of them moved like one body, circling the lie until I was outside it. That night, Dad came to my bedroom door. He did not yell. That made it worse. He said if I could not respect the decisions being made by the people responsible for the ranch, then maybe I needed space to learn gratitude. I asked him if he was kicking me out. He looked past my shoulder at the room I had slept in since childhood and said, "I'm saying this house needs peace." By sunrise, my suitcase was on the porch. Mom stood in the doorway, wearing her robe, arms folded tight. She would not meet my eyes. Colton leaned against the kitchen counter behind her, drinking coffee from Grandpa's mug. Dad held out the Ford keys like he was granting mercy. "The truck is yours," he said. "Since you care so much about old things nobody else can use." I drove away with everything I owned, rattling behind the seat. I expected someone to call before I reached the highway. I expected Mom to break. I expected Dad to realize what he had done. That is the childish part of being thrown away by your own family. Some corner of you still believes there is a line they will not cross even after you are watching them cross it in the rearview mirror. No one called. I slept the first week in a motel outside Stillwater and took a temp job scanning documents for a rural bank. At first I only needed money. Then I started reading what I scanned. Mortgage instruments, notices of default, lien releases, auction terms, asset schedules, deficiency letters. I learned the language people use when land changes hands because someone trusted the wrong person. It was cold language, but it was honest. Every number had to answer for itself. A woman named Ruth Delaney supervised the department. She was in her 60s, wore red reading glasses, and had no patience for self-pity. One evening she found me crying quietly in the file room after I recognized the structure of a loan similar to Colton's. She did not hug me. She put a stack of foreclosure packets on the table and said, "Then learn. Pain that stays ignorant just keeps bleeding." So I learned. I learned how public notices worked, how collateral was layered, how families lost land in pieces before they lost it all at once. I learned to spot inflated projections and friendly appraisals. I learned that a confident son, with a weak business plan, could ruin 3 generations faster than a drought if his parents kept mistaking swagger for competence. Years passed. I moved from scanning papers to reviewing them, then from reviewing to managing distressed agricultural assets for investors who wanted land but did not understand it. I became useful in rooms where nobody expected a woman in worn boots to understand water rights, grazing leases, soil reports, and auction law better than men with monogrammed cuffs. I kept Grandpa's truck running. I kept every document I could find on Reed Ranch in a labeled folder. I told myself it was closure. It was not closure. It was a map back. The first official notice came to my work email on a Tuesday morning, forwarded by an auction contact who knew I tracked rural Oklahoma properties. The subject line was plain, "Upcoming sale, Reed Ranch asset package." For a few seconds I could not open it. I sat at my desk in Tulsa, with my coffee cooling beside my keyboard, staring at those words, while the old wound in me became very still. When I finally clicked, the packet loaded slowly. There it was. Main residence, equipment barn, horse facilities, north pasture, west creek bottom, mineral considerations excluded, water rights included. 1,200 acres offered as a full package, pending lender approval. The borrower history was layered through companies and guarantees, but Colton's name appeared more than once. So did Dad's. So did Mom's. At the bottom of the email, beneath dates and registration rules, was one sentence that made the room around me disappear. Family members may attend as observers. I read it 3 times. Observers. That was what they had turned me into years ago. A girl watching through windows while decisions were made about the land she knew better than anyone. A daughter expected to stand outside the room and accept whatever story they told afterward. But this time the rules were different. This time I understood the paperwork. This time I knew how auctions worked. And this time I had enough money to do more than watch. The invitation to the Reed family reunion came 11 days after the auction notice, written in my mother's careful cursive on cream stationery, thick enough to feel like a performance. She did not call. Marlene Reed never called when paper could make distance look polite. The card said the family was gathering to honor Grandpa Amos's legacy and celebrate a new chapter for Reed Ranch. Under that, in smaller writing, she added, "Please dress appropriately. We want everyone comfortable." I sat at my kitchen table in Tulsa and read that last line until it became almost funny. Everyone comfortable. Not honest. Not safe. Not accountable. Comfortable. My mother had built her entire life around that word, arranging people and secrets like furniture so no guest would bump into the truth. If the ranch was being auctioned, then this reunion was not a celebration. It was a curtain. By then I already knew enough to understand what they were trying to do. The lender had agreed to a structured sale because the debt had become too ugly to hide and too large to refinance. Colton's company had collapsed under equipment leases, supplier lawsuits, and personal guarantees Dad had signed after too many dinners with too many handshakes. Mom had signed one document too, though I doubted she had read more than the sticky note telling her where to put her name. My contact at the auction company was a man named Peter Haskins, dry-voiced, precise, and allergic to drama. I had worked with him on 3 agricultural asset sales before, and he knew I did not bid emotionally. That changed when I called him about Reed Ranch. I told him I wanted to register through a holding company and keep my identity confidential unless I won. There was a long pause on the line before he said, "You understand what buying family land can do to a family?" "I understand what losing it already did," I said. The money was not magic. I had not found a hidden treasure or married someone rich or stumbled into luck. I had spent 11 years living below what I earned, buying small parcels before developers noticed them, consulting on distressed ranches and taking equity instead of bonuses when everyone else wanted quick cash. One creek bottom conservation deal outside Pawhuska had paid more than anyone expected. I put nearly all of it aside because some part of me had been waiting for a door I was afraid would open. When Reed Ranch hit the auction list, that door opened. I had enough for the deposit lender verification and a serious bid. Not enough to be reckless, but enough to be dangerous if the other bidders hesitated. Peter warned me the property carried emotional weight in the county, which meant people might bid for pride instead of numbers. I told him pride had already overpaid for everything in my family. I would not. Still, the night before the reunion I did not sleep. I sat on the floor beside my bed with the auction packet spread around me. Parcel maps, water rights summary, title exceptions, equipment exclusions, photographs of the house where my mother had put my suitcase on the porch. Every page looked professional, but beneath the clean formatting I could see the life inside it. The cattle guard Grandpa welded crooked, the barn door I painted red at 16. The pond, where Colton pushed me in and called it a joke. At 2 in the morning I went outside and sat in the truck. The cab smelled like old vinyl dust and machine oil no cleaner ever fully removed. I put my hand on the steering wheel and imagined Grandpa Amos beside me, hat low, eyes forward, letting silence do its work. I wanted him to tell me I was doing the right thing. I wanted him to say buying the ranch back was not revenge. But dead people do not give permission. They leave you with what they taught you. So I made my own decision. I would go to the reunion. I would let them show me exactly who they still were. Then I would go to the auction and do what needed to be done. When I arrived the next morning, the ranch looked dressed for a lie. White tents stood near the barn. Tables had blue runners and mason jars filled with sunflowers. A photographer moved people toward the porch in coordinated groups. Someone had hung a banner between 2 cedar posts that read, "Reed, Roots Run Deep." I stared at it through the windshield and thought about roots, how they can hold soil together or choke everything trying to grow. What happened at the gate did not surprise me, but it still cut. You can know a knife is coming and still feel the blade. Mom's shame, Dad's lecture, Colton's joke, the cousins looking away. Every word settled into a place already scarred, but scars are not numb the way people think. They remember pressure. They know when an old hand has come back to press the same bruise. After I drove away from the house, I did not leave the ranch. I took the service road around the south pasture and parked near the old equipment shed where Grandpa used to keep spare fence posts and coffee cans full of bent nails. From there I could see the white tents through the trees but could not hear the laughter. It was a good distance, close enough to remember, far enough not to beg. My phone buzzed at 1118. It was Peter. "Your registration is confirmed," he said. "Your representative is checked in. Deposit cleared. If your bid wins, the announcement can be made publicly as requested. Are you sure about that last part?" I looked at the house. "Yes. You know there may be questions." "There should be." Another pause. "Then I'll see you inside at noon." I ended the call and sat still for a moment. My hands were not shaking exactly, but they did not feel like they belonged to the rest of me. I opened the folder on the passenger seat and checked the documents again, though I knew every page. Copies of the original collateral language, default notices, public filings linking Colton's company to the debt stack, Dad's personal guarantee, Mom's signature, and the cashier's confirmation proving I had done what they never thought I could do. Near the house, applause rose under the tent. I got out of the truck and walked just far enough to see through a gap in the cottonwoods. Colton stood at the center with a microphone, one boot propped casually on the edge of a wooden platform like he was running for office. Dad stood beside him, proud and stiff. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The photographer hovered, capturing grief dressed up as leadership. Colton's voice. A few relatives clapped. I watched Aunt Janice lean toward Uncle Roy and whisper something. He frowned. They had questions. Of course they did. People always have questions when the story feels rehearsed. But most families train themselves not to ask in public, because public truth makes everyone responsible for what they hear. Dad took the microphone next. There have been rumors, he said. People love rumors when a family owns land. But let me be clear. The Reeds are not losing anything. We are restructuring. We are moving with the times. And Colton has worked tirelessly to make sure this family's name remains respected. The words landed like stones in my stomach. Not losing anything. Restructuring. Respected. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed tone could outrun paperwork. For years that had worked on me. Dad could say a cruel thing in a steady voice and make me question whether I had heard it wrong. But auction packets do not care how steady your voice is. Mom stepped up last, smiling too brightly. And we are so grateful everyone could come today, she said. Family means standing together, even when change feels hard. Her eyes moved over the crowd searching, and for 1 second I thought she might be looking for me. Then, she added, some people have a harder time understanding that, but we keep the door open. There it was again. The open door. The generous parents. The difficult daughter. Even after they had told me to move the truck out of sight, even after they had watched me drive away, they were already rewriting it into mercy. I almost walked back then. Not to fight. Not to defend myself. Just to ask her how a door could be open when my suitcase had once been on the porch. But noon was close. The auction was held in the old sale barn, not the main house. That felt fitting. Grandpa had bought and sold cattle there, argued prices there, laughed with neighbors there, and once taught me how to stand still when men tried to talk over me. The auction company had set up rows of folding chairs, a registration table, and a projector showing parcel maps on a white screen. The air smelled like dust, coffee, and old wood baked by sun. I entered through the side door. A few heads turned, then turned away when people realized I was the woman from the old truck. That was another advantage of being underestimated. People did not study you closely when they thought they already knew what you were. I took a seat in the last row and placed Grandpa's worn tan hat on my lap. Peter stood near the front, flipping through a clipboard. Colton walked in 10 minutes later with Dad and 2 men I recognized from public filings connected to his failed investor group. His smile faltered when he saw me, but only for a breath. Then he came over, leaning down as if speaking to a child in church. This is for registered parties and observers savvy. Not a place to make a scene. I know what it is, I said. Dad arrived behind him, face dark. Your mother is upset. You left without speaking to her. You told me to move the truck out of sight. That did not mean disappear. It usually does in this family. His mouth tightened. Do not do this today. I looked at him carefully. There was sweat at his temples, though the barn fans were running. His collar sat too tight. For the first time I noticed fear under the anger. Not guilt. Fear. He was not afraid he had hurt me. He was afraid of losing control in front of witnesses. Colton straightened and gave a little laugh for the men behind him. Let her sit, Dad. She probably wants to see how real business works. One of the men with him checked his phone and avoided my eyes. That told me enough. Their group was not confident. Maybe they had discovered the debt mess was worse than Colton admitted. Maybe their financing had weakened. Maybe they were only there to save face. Colton kept smiling, but his jaw moved like he was grinding something bitter between his teeth. Peter began at noon exactly. He explained the asset package, lender conditions, deposit requirements, closing timeline, and the fact that the ranch would be sold as a whole, not divided. A murmur passed through the room at that. Selling as a whole raised the price but protected the land from being carved into pieces. I had pushed for that quietly through my representative. If I lost, at least I wanted the ranch to remain intact. As Peter read the legal description, the room seemed to shrink around each word. Main residence and surrounding 5 acres, equipment barn, South Hay Meadow, North Grazing Tract, West Creek Bottom, water access, easements, existing lease obligations, family cemetery access reserved. Grandpa Amos had insisted on that cemetery clause years ago, according to county records. Even now, he had protected the dead better than my parents protected the living. The bidding opened lower than I expected. A cattleman from Payne County made the first offer. A land investment group raised it. Colton's man lifted his number confidently, and Dad exhaled like that meant victory. I did not move. My representative, a woman named Denise who sat 2 rows ahead in a gray blazer, did not look back at me. We had agreed on that. No eye contact, no signals, no family theater. The numbers climbed. Slowly at first, then faster. One bidder dropped out when water rights were clarified. Another stopped after Peter restated the closing deposit. Colton's investor group came in twice, each time less confidently. Dad whispered something sharp. Colton whispered back. From the corner of my eye I saw Mom slip into the barn and stand near the wall, clutching her purse with both hands. Then the room shifted. It happens in auctions the way weather shifts on open land. The noise thins. The serious bidders remain. The pretending ends. Peter called the current amount, then looked toward Denise. She lifted her bidder card. The number jumped. Not wildly. Strategically. Enough to clear hesitation. Enough to say the bidder behind her understood value, and had no interest in dancing for pride. Colton turned toward Denise, trying to place her. He could not. Then he looked around the room and found me in the back row. His eyes narrowed. For the first time all day, he did not smirk. Peter called for another bid. Colton's investor hesitated. Dad leaned toward him, whispering urgently. The man shook his head once. Colton's face flushed. He stepped closer, speaking through clenched teeth. The man spread his hands in a gesture that said what words did not know more. The room watched without pretending not to. My mother's lips parted. She looked from Colton to Dad, then toward the front, as if someone else might rescue the story. Peter waited. Any advance? Silence. He looked across the room one final time. Any advance on the full Reed Ranch asset package? No one moved. My heartbeat was loud enough that I thought the row in front of me might hear it. I pressed my fingers into the brim of Grandpa's hat. The felt was worn thin where his hands had shaped it over years of heat and work. I remembered him saying, "Land tells the truth." I wondered if truth always felt this heavy right before it stood up. Peter lowered his gaze to the final paperwork on the podium. The high bid has been accepted pending standard closing procedures, he said. At the request of the winning bidder, the purchaser's identity will be announced publicly. Colton let out a relieved little laugh, as if he had convinced himself some friendly investor had saved him after all. Dad straightened his shoulders. Mom closed her eyes for half a second, maybe praying the family name had survived. Around the room, relatives leaned forward. Peter opened the sealed page. And I stood before he said my name. Peter Haskins looked down at the sealed page, but I was already on my feet. It was not dramatic the way people imagine dramatic things. No music swelled. No one gasped yet. A folding chair scraped behind me, and somewhere near the wall, my mother whispered my name like a warning. I held Grandpa Amos's hat in both hands, and stood in the back row of the sale barn while the room waited for a stranger to own our past. Peter's voice carried clearly. The winning bidder for the full Reed Ranch asset package is a registered holding company represented by Miss Denise Walker. He paused, then lifted his eyes toward the room. The beneficial purchaser requesting public disclosure is Savannah Reed. For a second, nobody understood. My name moved through the barn, slower than sound should move, touching each person differently. Aunt Janice turned all the way around. One of Dad's cousins took off his cap. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Colton smiled with half his mouth, the kind of smile people wear when their brain refuses to accept what their ears just heard. Then my father stood. That is not possible. Peter did not flinch. He had probably seen men lose land before, and he had probably learned that disbelief is usually the first bid people make after the auction is over. The registration was verified, the deposit cleared. The bid has been accepted pending standard closing procedures. Colton laughed once, sharp and ugly. No, she works some paperwork job in Tulsa. She drives a truck that barely starts. There is no way she bought Reed Ranch. I walked down the center aisle slowly, not because I wanted attention but because I had spent too many years hurrying out of rooms where my family had made me feel unwelcome. This time I let them watch me arrive. Denise stepped aside when I reached the front. Peter gave me a small nod, then placed the purchaser's summary on the podium. Dad came toward me with his shoulders squared. "Savannah, whatever this is, we need to speak privately." "No," I said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It landed harder because I had not decorated it with an explanation. Dad stopped as if he had walked into a fence he could not see. For most of my life, private conversations had been where my family bent the truth back into shape. Private was where Mom cried until I apologized. Private was where Dad lowered his voice and called control responsibility. Mom moved closer, her eyes wet now. "Savannah, sweetheart, please. This is still family land." "It was family land this morning too," I said. "When you told me to hide Grandpa's truck." Her face twisted. "That was not what I meant." "It was exactly what you meant." Colton stepped between us, trying to regain the room. "Fine. You made your point. You embarrassed everybody. Congratulations." He leaned closer, lowering his voice enough to sound reasonable but not enough to hide the threat. "Now, do the right thing, and transfer it back before you destroy this family." I looked at him, really looked at him. The polished boots, the expensive watch, the sweat collecting at his hairline. Colton had built a life out of being believed before anyone checked the numbers. That trick had worked on our parents, on relatives, on lenders for a while, and maybe even on himself. But paper has no favorite child. "I did not destroy this family," I said. "I just stopped letting you use the ranch to cover the damage." He scoffed. "You have no idea what I did for this place." "I know exactly what you did." I opened the folder I had carried from the truck and placed the first stack of documents on the podium. Not all of them, just enough. The original collateral language tied to Colton Reed Agricultural Supply, LLC. The amended guarantees signed by Dad. The notice of default. The lender correspondence. The public filing showing the equipment company had been insolvent for months before the family reunion invitations were mailed. The room changed again. Earlier people had leaned forward out of curiosity. Now they leaned forward because the story they had been fed was falling apart in front of them. Dad's face darkened. Mom shook her head as if paper could be rude. Colton stared at the documents with the offended expression of a man who thought consequences were a personal attack. "You had no right digging into that," Dad said. "I found most of it in public records," I said. "The rest came through the auction packet after I registered. You taught me years ago that I was not allowed inside family business, so I learned where truth lives when families lock the door." Aunt Janice stood near the second row. She was Dad's older sister, blunt as a shovel and old enough not to fear Marlene's tears. "Wade," she said, "is this why Amos's place went to auction?" Dad did not answer. That silence did more damage than any confession. My father had always believed silence made him powerful, but in a room full of relatives who had just heard the auctioneer say my name, his silence sounded like guilt with its hat in its hands. Colton tried again. The business took a hit. Everybody knows markets shifted. I was trying to expand the Reed name. I was trying to make us matter. Grandpa's hat felt heavy in my hands. We already mattered. The land mattered. The people who worked it mattered. You just wanted it to look bigger from the highway. His eyes flashed. "You always thought small." "No," I said. "I thought long." Mom began crying then, quietly at first, then with enough sound that a few relatives glanced away out of old habit. She stepped toward me with both hands raised. "Savannah, I am your mother. I made mistakes, yes, but you cannot punish us like this. Your father is not well. Colton has children to think about someday. This ranch is our home." I wanted that line not to hurt. I wanted to be so healed that her voice could pass through me without finding anything soft. But healing is not becoming stone. Healing is feeling the blade and not handing it back to the person who cut you. "This was my home too," I said. "You put my suitcase on the porch." Mom covered her mouth. Dad snapped, "That was years ago." "So were the signatures that started this," I said. "You still expect them to matter." Peter shifted beside the podium, professional but watchful. Denise placed a hand lightly on her folder, ready if anyone tried to turn the scene into a legal argument. I did not need either of them yet. The strongest thing in that room was not the law. It was the fact that I no longer wanted my parents to admit they had loved me wrong. I only wanted them to stop owning the place where they did it. I turned to the room. "For clarity, Reed Ranch will not be split for development. The cemetery access will remain protected. Existing employees who want to stay will be offered new contracts. The north pasture stays pasture. The creek bottom stays intact. Grandpa Amos's house will be restored, not staged for investors. A murmur passed through the barn, softer this time. Relief maybe, or shame. It is hard to tell the difference in families when people realize the person they dismissed was the only one who had planned beyond the next appearance. Colton's voice broke through it. And what about us? I turned back to him. You will have no management authority here. Neither will Dad. Neither will Mom. You can attend the cemetery by appointment like everyone else protected under the access clause. You can collect whatever personal belongings are legally yours from the house after closing. That is all. Dad looked at me as if I had slapped him. You would bar your own parents from your grandfather's house. I am barring the people who leveraged it, lied about it, and kicked me out of a reunion for arriving in his truck. Mom whispered. We were embarrassed. I know, I said. That was the only honest thing you showed me today. The sentence emptied something out of her. She sat down in the nearest chair, no longer crying, just staring at the floor. For the first time I saw my mother without performance. Not evil, not monstrous. Just small in the way people become small when the image they protected costs more than the love they neglected. Colton grabbed the documents from the podium and shoved them back toward me. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said. It makes me finished with you. He stared at me, waiting for more. He wanted a fight, because fighting would let him turn himself into a victim. I gave him nothing. That is something I learned from auctions. Once the final bid is accepted, you do not keep negotiating with people who ran out of money and truth at the same time. The closing took weeks because land does not care about emotional timing. Attorneys reviewed title issues. The lender confirmed payments. Employees signed new agreements. Colton tried to interfere twice, once through an angry email, and once by claiming a tractor belonged to his company. Both attempts ended when Denise sent documentation back with highlighted dates. Dad called me 4 times. Mom sent 1 letter. I did not answer either until the legal transfer was complete. When I finally returned to Reed Ranch as the owner, I came alone in Grandpa's blue Ford. The same truck my mother had wanted hidden. The same truck Colton called a museum piece. The same truck Dad had handed me like a consolation prize on the morning he pushed me out. It rattled over the cattle guard engine, rough but steady, and for the first time in 11 years, no one stood at the gate deciding whether I belonged. I parked in front of the house and sat for a while, with both hands on the wheel. The porch still sagged on the left. The horseshoe wind chime moved in the breeze. The white reunion tents were gone, but their square marks remained in the grass, pale outlines of a celebration built over a collapse. I got out, walked to the fence Grandpa had once taught me to mend, and pressed my palm to the top rail. People talk about revenge like it should feel hot. Mine did not. It felt quiet. It felt like unlocking a door without asking who approved. It felt like signing employee contracts at the kitchen table while the morning sun came through windows my mother used to polish before guests arrived. It felt like choosing repairs over punishment, boundaries over speeches, and truth over the kind of peace that requires one person to disappear. I did not become cruel to prove they had been cruel first. That would have kept me tied to them. I kept the ranch whole, because Grandpa Amos had kept me whole in the only way he knew how, by teaching me skills nobody could laugh out of my hands. He gave me an old truck, yes, but inside that truck he gave me maps, patience, memory, and the habit of looking directly at what other people tried to rename. My parents told relatives I had changed. They were right. I had changed from a daughter waiting on an apology into a woman who understood that some apologies only arrive when power leaves the room. Colton told people I stole the ranch. The county records said otherwise. That was the good thing about records. They did not care who was charming at dinner. I did not forgive them in a way that let them back into my life. I did not hate them in a way that let them live in my head. I sent 1 letter through Denise explaining the boundaries, the access rules, and the fact that all future communication about the property would go through her office. It was not warm. It was not cruel. It was clear. Clarity is sometimes the kindest thing you can give yourself. That fall, I had the old truck repaired properly. New brakes, new belts, new tires. I refused a new paint job. The faded blue stayed along with the scratches, dents, and sunburned hood. A man at the shop asked why I would put money into a truck that would never look new. I told him some things are not valuable because they shine. Some things are valuable because they carried you out when nobody else would. On the first cold morning of November, I drove the north fence line just after sunrise. The grass was silver with frost and the cattle moved slowly through the low light. I stopped where Grandpa and I had once sat watching that same pasture before he died. For a long time I listened to the engine tick and the wind move over land my family had almost lost, trying to look richer than they were. I used to think being kicked out meant I had no home. Now I know sometimes being kicked out is the only reason you learn how to build a door no one else controls. Family can be blood, but blood without respect is just history. Love without accountability is just another debt someone expects you to pay. They kicked me out of the family reunion for arriving in Grandpa Amos's old truck. They just never imagined that same truck would bring me back as the owner of every acre they lost.